Swell. I was just playing with it. So.
Okay.
Most of you know who I am. I'd be there and member of the church here, and I'm the coordinator of the mental health program for the grant that we received from the National Presbyterian. Is that what I say? Did I say it right? National Presbyterian granted us a grant to do educational programs on mental health for the community, not just our church, and this is the first one. And if you know people that are interested, we're going to have a series of programs on either Sundays or Saturdays over the next 4 months through end of October, and there'll be announcements made. Some of the programs will be 1 hour after church, like this one, and some will be 2 hours on a Saturday. And it's going to be on mental health resources as well as how to help yourself relate to mentally distressed people, including family members. And so this is not teaching mental health people how to be better mental health people. It's about teaching lay people how to relate to the mentally distressed. So this is the first one. Siri and I talked about it. So this is Siri Alrick. He's a long-term colleague of mine, and he doesn't want me to brag much about it, but he's been a mental health provider to children, adults, alcohol, all kinds of disorders since, 1973?
Something like that, yeah.
So, you're very experienced. So he's been around Jackson County for that long, and he was a former clinical director for Addiction Recovery Center for 15 years, so he's got a lot of experience. So we decided that we all have been mentally challenged as a result of this pandemic, even those of us who think we're pretty mentally strong. So we decided that would be the first topic, is how do we come out of this pandemic and continue to be resilient. So you're on.
Good.
Siri
Good.
Alrick, and he'll explain his name to you.
Yeah, first things first, I guess. Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here. When Bea was introducing, it made me kind of reflect on what we were talking about when we were coming together with this grant, and then and what I might do and be part of that. Because what we wanted to look at was that how do we maintain in order that we can help others maintain? In quite simple dialogue, it would be that. And I was going to start this by saying, how many people in the last year and a half had some stress? How many people had a whole lot of stress? I mean, holy mackerel. When I think about this, like we have, different coping strategies, and we have different, understandings and different things, but we look at just having the dryness and the drought and the whole weather thing. And then let's throw in some fires. And then we have just a little fire here locally, and that process. And then we have the most divisive political scene that, I'm in my early 70s. I've never seen it as divisive as what it is. And it's tense, we have that tension. And then there's the financial things, and then all of this stuff. I know 15 different families that lost their houses or places of residence during that Alameda fire. So not only is it tense for them, but it's tense for me to feel that. And so what we want to look at is like, how do we handle this stuff? And because one of the things that we generally speaking, we are a group of people, this church especially, I know, is a group of people that has a really committed desire to serve the community. it's been there for ages and ages and ages. I mean, the letting AA and NA meetings and different other 12-step meetings to meet here, and helping the homeless and all of this stuff. It's really been a dynamic community-based service. And so how do we help this process and really take a look at it? Because there's something that happened. Somebody told me this a long time ago, and they called it the toothpaste tube syndrome. This is highly, structured scientific stuff here. The toothpaste tube syndrome. Has anybody ever had a toothpaste tube that should have been thrown away 2 days ago, but you've kept it, and you forgot to get another one, and you go, oh, like this? And I was laughing about that this morning when I was thinking about it, because now I use an electric thing, toothbrush, and it doesn't lay down as well on the counter of the sink, because it used to be that you could do it with one thumb, but then if you really you'd have to use both thumbs, which meant you had to put the toothbrush on the counter, and like this. And the metaphor for that is that I'm kind of like that toothpaste tube. If I let myself get so empty, I'm not able to do my function. And so as members of this church, as members of a community of transformation and uplifting and stuff, what we want to do is find ways to allow ourselves to be fed and to be uplifted again or filled again. Because what happens with that, if my toothpaste tube, speaking of that, is empty, and I go to help people and I can't help them, or I feel overwhelmed because I have too much to do, all of those things like this, what happens is that then I can become, my biggest desire is to be of help. And yet I get resentful helping people because I'm so worn out and empty. And what we want to do is refill that. And how do we refill that is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. The whole concept of resiliency. What does it mean to be able to come forward and move forward and to go back to form is one of the definitions of resiliency. To go back to form. But in order to do that, I have to be able to fill myself up and to do that process. The tenets of what we'll start talking about, and then I've added some other things as well of my own, but one of the other pieces to this is that if I don't allow myself to be filled and uplifted, I'm not going to be very effective. And like I said, I'm going to get really, really tired and run down and then frustrated. This resiliency piece, I read an article there was a mega study, and this was some time ago now, and I was in an office and I picked up a magazine and I started to read it, and they had this wonderful article about this mega study, and I didn't take any notes because I was just reading it, but the information had stuck with me. And it was a mega study of people that had lived through in 2004, in the late part, I think it was in December, there was that huge 9.1 earthquake in the Indian Ocean, and it created a tsunami that hit the Asian coast and some of the Indian coast. It was one of the most graphic things that ever happened in my life. It was well documented, but there were over somewhere between 200 and 300,000 people were killed within just a short 2 hours or so from that. It was a gigantic thing. About 9 months later, we had Hurricane Katrina that hit the Louisiana and Mississippi coast, and we all probably remember that, the dynamic effect that had on the physical structure and on people's lives and all of that. And the gist of this study was that why was it that like two people that lived on the same street in New Orleans that had basically the same type of living situation, that were in the same social economic group, and everything was kind of similar, But why did this person do really well and go through it like, oh, okay, let's keep moving on, and this person was just bogged down with that. And what they came up with was this concept of resiliency, that people had resiliency. So they wanted to look at what made up resiliency. And so they came up with 4 different attributes of people that were resilient. And that was pretty interesting stuff. Now, with my background and my study and recovery and all kinds of other things, I've come up with one more added factor in resiliency that we want to talk about. But that's how this came about. That why was it that some people can really work with this, and why is it that other people get totally, encumbered by the problem? I don't know of any time in my life that it's been as stressful as what it's been in the last couple of years. We're in a pretty much agreement with that. Like I mentioned, those other things. I mean, I know people that are in absolute shock right now, just when there's smoke in the air because of what they went through last year. And you think about that fire, for us that live locally, it's almost way in the distant past. It's barely been 10 months ago. We have all of this stuff going on, and so we want to work through that. Because if I'm healthy with my own process, that means I can also help others at a greater degree. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is that how do I uplift myself? How do I move forward? How do I use some tools? But also then, how does that move me into being able to help other people, specifically the people with mental illness right now, because that's what this grant is. They're kind of, pardon my language here, but their mental illness is kind of the bastard stepchild of therapy in our world. It isn't viewed as the same as a lot of other things. So we want to work on that. We're going to work on looking at that differently as part of this. I also want to be as relaxed and, let's say, just open as possible. So if you have a question or something, I think that's okay. Is that, just, speak up. And I like to say that I believe in the ABCs and the XYZs of lecturing. The ABCs are always be cheerful. And the XYZs are examine your zipper, because nobody's going to tell you until you're done that it's down. That's so I'm. Yes, absolutely. So of these things, there are 5 qualities or characteristics that I want to go over. The very first one that they came up with was that people that were resilient had the capacity or the ability to quiet their mind. Very, very interesting. I was sharing with Bea earlier that I came up with this quote that somebody had made to me. It said, "It's hard to think your way out of a faulty rationalization." It's hard. We don't do it. It's like one thought produces another thought, and like this. Now, the average adult will think somewhere between, and it's variable, but it's somewhere between 75 to 85,000 thoughts a day. We're always thinking. We're thinking about, how am I, like right now, how am I doing? Okay, I really like that dress. I wonder if it's going to be this hot. We're always thinking. But what happens when we have a problem and some tumultuous issue or some traumatic issue or some impacting issue is that we think about it over and over. Has anybody ever had one of those? Where you're going to lay down and get some rest because you need to rest, but what are you doing? You're thinking about what the problem is. We think and think and think over this stuff. And so what they found is that people that had the ability or had some tools that they could just quiet the mind. Now, a good way of doing that would be meditation. A lot of people will meditate. They found, this is also, by the way, all of these techniques, everybody is an individual and has their own format that works the best for you. So what we're talking about here is in pretty general terms, because we're all different, and you are the expert on yourself. Not somebody like me or somebody else that, I love it when somebody, just do this and this and this. Well, this is how you can do this. And no, we have to find out what's really going on with ourselves, because we also find out that we'll talk about that later too, that there are certain buzzwords that keep us triggered and so forth. So, how do you quiet your mind? One of the ways of quieting your mind, believe it or not, is gardening. There's a specific, I had a Chinese acupuncturist that was teaching this class, and I was a part of it. And there was a specific treatment where to calm yourself of putting your hands in the dirt. It was just really interesting. And I find that when I garden, I'm just thinking of it. It's a whole different thing. I quiet myself. We know that exercise for some people can be really helpful to quiet the mind. And different activities such as that. We know that prayer and that process can be very, very helpful for people. So we know that those things can be helpful. There is one technique that I would like to show you, and it's called I call it the 8884 breathing technique. But what it is, it can move from beta brainwave pattern to alpha brainwave pattern in about 2 minutes doing this breath. It was taught to me by a medical anomaly, and he was a medical anomaly because his body could heal very quickly. And I first saw him on in a cover of a magazine when I was in college at the Menninger Clinic, and they were checking on him, and then why he could heal his body, they'd stick like a knife-like thing through his arm, and in 2 days it'd be totally healed. He was just really interesting guy. But he used to live here in Ashland, and I was one of the most informative things that I've been blessed with doing was to do a 3-day seminar at his own institute. And he had all of this knowledge about how the body works and the electrochemical energy fields and so forth. But this one particular exercise was really, really helpful. It is, could I have somebody pass this out? Could you do that for me? Thank you. What this is a breathing exercise that has been very helpful. Now, if you have other breathing exercises, by all means use those. This isn't to replace anything, it's just another tool in the toolbox. But what it is a way of formally and specifically moving the brain from beta, where there's thought or cognition, those 65 to 80, 75, 85,000 thoughts a day, into a place where the function of the brain is totally different. It's very quiet, it's very peaceful. It's a way of moving from, if you're like from deep, kind of spiritually, from a deeper connection with prayer, a deeper connection with the meditation, that kind of thing. Does anybody ever have problems with sleep? This particular exercise is the biggest feedback that I've got over the years is with sleep. And so it's a very interesting and easy thing to do. You inhale for 8 seconds through the nose. You hold that for 8 seconds. You exhale for 8 seconds. Pardon me. You inhale for 8 seconds, hold for 8 seconds, exhale for 8 seconds, and wait 4 seconds before you inhale again. So it's 8884. What they found at the Menninger Clinic, and what he found, and his name was Jack Schwartz, what he found in his own institute when they would study people and put EEG electrodes on and do more scientifically, they found that everybody that they checked, if they did this 3 full complete times, everybody would go from beta to alpha. I found that I've done it enough that I just start doing it, and halfway through the first breath, it works. But what it does is it gives us a break from our thinking. I was one time here in Ashland. I saw a bumper sticker, and I loved this bumper sticker. And I went, "Holy mackerel! I wonder where they got that." And so I'm following this car around, and it was some young lady driving this car, and she's following it around it. And then suddenly I realized that maybe this kind of looked a little bad. And I wasn't stalking, but I suppose I was stalking the bumper sticker. But the bumper sticker said, "Don't believe everything you think." And now it's out and about much more so. But it was so fun to look at that. Don't believe everything. Just because I think it doesn't mean it's true. And we live in a world today where people are just, I think they're being held hostage by their thinking. And this gives us a break. This is real simple. So practice this and try this. It can be really, really helpful. Again, it's pretty simple. Well, you inhale 8 seconds, hold for 8 seconds, exhale for 8 seconds, wait 4 seconds, and inhale again. He also said do it both the inhale and exhale through your nose. And when I asked him, I said, "Why would you do that?" And he said, "Because it works better." So he was pretty cut and dry. It's pretty fun.
Can we practice it?
Sure, you want to practice it? Okay. If we go a little beyond, is that okay? Okay, because I have a tendency that I might get going on this. So what I'd like to do is that I'll just count it out for you. Is that okay? So it's easier when you do this to close your eyes, because then you're limiting the visual aspect of your brain. You don't have to focus with that. So what I'm going to say inhale and then exhale to clear your lungs. And then I'll say inhale again, and I'll count this out. And remember that it is you inhale and exhale both through the nose. Okay? So inhale and clear your lungs. And inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hold the breath out, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hold the breath out, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hold the breath out. 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And breathe normally for a moment. So how are we doing? Isn't that wonderful?
I was surprised though to find that I couldn't get all the air out through my nose, and so if I breathe out in my mouth, I can get more out. But it worked great.
It works. And the more you practice this, the more it can be really a functional tool. And like I said, the biggest feedback that I've gotten in using this has been people for sleep. That it really does work, because one of two things usually happens when you do this breath if you can't sleep. You'll go to sleep, or you will not be thinking about not going to sleep, so you'll be relaxed. Because what's the worst thing about not going to sleep is thinking, I need to go, relax, close your eyes and do this. And so it's really it can be a real functional thing. But it's a very big help to stop that incessant thinking. Just because I have thinking does not mean that it's focused on solution. There's a philosophy in the 12-step programs that we talk about, look toward the solution, don't look toward the problem. We do the same thing when we counsel people with chronic pain. Look at what's going right rather than at what's going wrong, because we have a choice on how we direct our thinking. And this particular exercise can really give me a break on that. So anyway, it's a way of calming the mind and quieting that insurgent need to have a thought.
There are a couple of choirs that I'm in that often do this as well, and it helps everyone.
Just
And then they're ready to focus.
Yes. So it really is. It's a very workable thing. The next piece of resiliency that they found with people that were resilient, a quality that people had, is that they had a good sense of humor. They could laugh.
Sorry.
I did that on purpose, by the way. Why is this? We'll just,
I put it in my pocket when I have, because I have the same problem that pops off.
so, laughter. How many people in here have a good sense of humor? It's critical that we have that. Do you know why? Do you know why? There's some really specific reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that you affect brain chemistry with laughter. Has anybody ever remembered or hearing of Norman Cousins? Norman Cousins was not so well known now, but he's still quoted now. Norman Cousins was not a scientist. He wasn't a medical person. He was a publisher and writer. I think he published some magazine, Saturday Review or something, in the late 60s and early 70s. And he came down with some type of intense pain. I think it was some form of arthritis, where it was, and they weren't going to give him morphine for arthritis back then. That was going to come later, and in the drug companies, giving, purposefully directing that. But at that time, basically all he had was aspirin. I don't even think the anti-inflammatories had been designed yet, other than aspirin. And so he was out of luck. But what he found something, and he's still quoted today. I was at a training 6-7 years ago, and they were talking about treating people for chronic pain who had opiate addiction tendencies, and how do you do that, and and all of that stuff. And the guy kept telling these little one-line jokes and puns and plays with it, and he spent a lot of time talking about Norman Cousins. Because what Norman Cousins did was he did his own research, and he found that if he watched funny TV shows or went to a funny movie, and he laughed heartily, if he could laugh heartily for 10 minutes, he'd produce enough natural endorphin load in his brain that he could sleep 2 to 3 hours through his intense pain. That laughter truly, how many of you remember Reader's Digest, and they had this one section, Laughter, the Best Medicine? And I don't read Reader's Digest anymore, but it's still very, very true. That laughter is a significant piece of us, that it's a gift of part of our nervous system. To lighten it up, it also quiets some of the other stuff. There's a quote from the Dalai Lama that I just love, and it's been some time ago, and I don't know if he still feels that way about the Chinese, but somebody asked him, well, sir, what do you think about the Chinese? And he just leaned his head back and started laughing and got this image of, this huge smile and laughter. And he said, oh, the Chinese, they're our best teachers. And because he laughed. I knew somebody that saw him personally and went through this line years ago, and and shook his, got a blessing or something like that, and they said he was the same way. He was just filled with laughter, divine laughter maybe. But people that had resiliency, that could go back, because remember, resiliency is being able to go back to form. We've had this, this intense year. We've had this intense process, and we've had, and then all kinds of other things have happened. Just all of this, but to go back to form. I'm not held hostage by people, places, things, or situations. And so it's like using laughter allows me to put things in perspective. And it allows me to be flooded with, the feel-good natural processes that I have. It's pretty interesting. We don't think about that. Life is too serious to laugh at it, and it's like the opposite. Life is so serious we need to laugh. We need to learn how to to have a sense of humor. And one of the things, sometimes we just think too much. Like the other night, I got really freaked out because I go, where does the sun go? Wait, where'd they, and I was up all night wondering where the sun went. And then it finally dawned on me.
Need a rim shot.
Yeah, I know. So, we need to laugh more. And we need to feel it. We need to feel that. And people that were resilient had that capacity. Not mean-spirited, not sarcastic, not that kind of stuff, not the gotcha type of humor that sometimes people will have, but just that rollicking laughter. I don't feel that way so much on what's on TV and movies and stuff now as I did years ago. I mean, probably some of us here, most of us maybe remember what it was like Carol Burnett and Red Skelton and All in the Family and Laugh-In and these things. And I saw a skit of Carol Burnett and Tim Conway where he's a dentist.
Yes.
And he keeps shooting himself. And I'm sitting there laughing my head. I'm alone in my head. I'm sitting there just laughing like crazy. And after, it was like uplifting. Our natural endorphin is extraordinarily powerful. And when we laugh, we just flood ourselves with that. Have you ever gotten in with your children or grandchildren or been around kids where they got the giggles? It's contagious. It's like, yeah, and it's just wonderful. Laughter is something that really does work for resiliency. I have to learn how to deal with that. Norman Cousin proved it, what is that, almost 50 years ago now, probably. And he was the father of attitudinal healing because he wrote a couple books, but part of it was laughter, and then part of it was like where you put your thoughts. Do I look towards solution, or do I just keep thinking about the problem? And laughter lets me get away from that. So if you have any good one-line jokes or something, just be willing to share them here because...
Just talking to a 3-year-old, I have a granddaughter, and she gets on the computer, and I'm laughing uproariously at some of the crazy stuff she says.
Exactly.
And she has the ability to see patterns and funny things and putting funny things together and pretending to be weird stuff. Yesterday she was putting a rug on top of her head and pretending to be a sheep.
Oh, how fun!
It was just hilarious.
Yeah. We need to learn to lighten up as individuals and as a culture. We need to lighten up. And laughter is one way of doing that. It's one way. But it's fun. It's the grandkids thing, and it's so fun. I know I could sit here and talk for 20 minutes about remembrances of my daughters when they were younger and the statements they would make to each other like this. And it was hilarious. It was so fun. But we can laugh. And when we laugh, we produce endorphin. And when we produce endorphin, we feel better. And we relax.
I saw Facebook. I don't encounter it as much as I used to. But they often send you memories. Like 6 years ago, you had this picture, And I laughed a lot when I saw it. It was my daughter, who at the time I think was 12, and we were still living in Fort Bragg, California, and there was one ice cream maker in the whole area, and Abby had her favorite ice cream. And I remember opening the freezer door, and it was this white ice cream container that said, "Abby's, eat and die." And I remember saying something like, "I don't think I'm going to try that flavor," but seeing that again, well, actually it was 8 years ago, really brought a smile to my spirit.
Pretty fun, pretty fun. So, we've talked about quieting the mind in whatever way that can work for us, that breathing technique or meditation, prayer, gardening, whatever, exercise, that I quiet that mind, please. And then we talked about laughter, the production of natural endorphin, and also just the change of focus. You know. The next one is that people that were resilient had the capacity to shift their perspective. Now, what does that mean? This is an interesting one, and I want to talk a little bit more about this one because I think it's really specific also to the goal of this grant and these classes that the church is offering, because one of the things we want to do is change the perspective about how do we work with people that have mental illness, and how do we deal with that, and how do I look at my own process and my own stuff with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I love this because I remember when, in one of my former roles as when I was clinical director in a private nonprofit agency, there's always issues of money. And we were having a hard time at that, it was like, okay, so somebody knew a business consultant, and we got, they volunteered to come and talk to us. And so we were sitting in there, and everybody's kind of going like, yeah, well, we have this and this, and we have this and this and this and this. And this guy was just a wonderful guy. But he was really Italian. And he had, he's listening to us for a while, and finally he just stands up like this, and he stands up and he goes, "Do you know what's wrong with all of you guys? You've got bark mark." Bark mark. Have you ever heard of that? No. Either had we. And we're going, what the hell's bark mark? What's going on here? And he goes, "Bark mark. You all have it." He said, "What is it?" He said, "Well, bark mark. You all heard the story. You can't see the forest because of the trees. You're so close to one of those trees that it's imprinting its bark right on your forehead. Back up. Back up. See the bigger perspective. See it bigger." Man, that stuck with me. That when we're in absolute turmoil, think about this. When we're in absolute turmoil, we think of only that. It could be a wide variety of things. It could be that there's a death, and I'm totally focusing on that death rather than focusing on, if I back up and to realize all the support that I have from everyone that is helping me and guiding me and loving me. I forget that. I look at, maybe somebody in this room besides me can get hooked and by political stuff right now. And the idea is that, wait a minute, just step back. There's a whole lot of other trees. There's a whole lot of other things going on. There's a bigger picture. In fact, there's a picture maybe even bigger than the forest itself that we're looking at. There is a completeness that when I allow myself to have a different perspective, there's a completeness that allows me to see beyond just the image and the picture of what's going on. I had a friend who was telling me that when he was married to a woman, and she had been a servant. She provided. She was a healer. She did all kinds of other things, and was a pretty amazing person. Had hundreds of students, and she developed cancer. And they went all over the world looking for more natural healing things. It didn't work. So then they went to traditional Western medicine, doctoring, and it didn't work. And she was, it was obvious that she was on her way out. He said there were verifiable times that she was talking to people on the phone lying in bed where he had to, this is years and years ago before cell phones, where they had to take the regular phone and put it on a pillow because she was too weak to hold the receiver. They had verifiable healings from her being able to do that when she was not even strong enough to hold the phone. And his teacher, when asked, he said, when she did pass, he said, how can this be? How can this be? And the teacher told him, the picture never testifies to the consequence. The picture never testifies to the consciousness. Consciousness must testify to the picture. And I've been chewing on that one for a long time. Consciousness must testify to the picture. How do I look at that? What is my perspective? And what happened is that when we do that we're not held hostage by it. It's very important because as we look at this stuff, we end up having to look at our beliefs. I'm entitled to my beliefs, but if my beliefs are holding me into a place that isn't bringing me the joy of my life, the joy of my living, and with that then the opportunity to serve more, then maybe I can look at those beliefs. To not be held hostage by the picture, but to hold up my consciousness. And this is also very important because as we look at dealing with mentally ill diagnosed people, we need to let go of our biases. Do you know what the term confirmation bias means? Has everybody heard that? It's just, and our society is just ringing with that right now. It's like, my God, I mean, there are certain politicians that literally, and I'm this, I have to work on this all the time, but literally they could walk across the Potomac River and there'd be a certain group that would be cursing them for too much splash. I'm looking for information to support my previously held position rather than looking for the truth. And people that have this capacity to change perspective, what that does for me, it allows me to be present in the here and now and look at things honestly and clearly and fully, and to not be held hostage by my archaic and old beliefs and patterns that maybe are only half-baked to begin with. And think about how this can be helpful to people. If I deal with somebody that's chronically mentally ill, for instance. How many people that are mentally ill have been judged because of not following through or not doing it right? We have a choice. We have a chance to change that. I like to tell the story of somebody that I worked with, and this is years and years ago. This gentleman was, I'll just say that he drank more beer than anybody that I've ever met before or since that time. He was chronically alcoholic, but he was also very, very mentally ill with a thought disorder. And he actually would drink to quell his symptoms, which is very, very common. Even with people on medication, when they're a lot of people will use other substances because the medication will balance things, but it also it's kind of like changing life from color to black and white. It's more functional, but it isn't nearly, it's not that zest, and so there's a tendency, and also just to self-medicate. Well, this person was chronically alcoholic and chronically mentally ill. But he was something else. That when I'd met with him and talked to him, he started talking to me about how much he liked to go to church. and that he went to church as regularly as he possibly could. He loved going to church, but he couldn't stay the whole time. He would actually hide beers out in the shrubbery outside, and he would go out and take a break and then go back into church. Now, when we look at this, and when society looked at this, how would they define him? Would they, huh? Yeah, they would define him, well, he's an alcoholic, or he's just one of those mentally ill people. I don't know anybody that would define him as that he was a really devout Christian man who loved God and did everything he could to be there. What we want to do is let go of the biases that we have and those notions, because it keeps us locked in a perspective. We have birthmark that we don't even know many times. I believe things because I believed them in the past. Somebody told me, they did a study, and these neurologists made this statement and said that a belief is just a way for your brain to not have to work. It's like overdrive. You don't have, it doesn't, technically, it's like, I don't have to think about that. Now, some of these beliefs are really handy and helpful. You know, if I put my belief is that if I put my finger on a red hot burner and it's going to hurt me, that's a pretty healthy belief. But if I believe that mentally ill people, for instance, are doing this purposely and they're lazy and and they're just all of that stuff, that's not based on anything except my own judgments. Does that make sense? To change my perspective is huge. The birthmark of other things, like what I'm saying about, like if I have a crisis monetarily and all of this stuff, I'm old enough now that I finally got it, that I've been taken this far, I probably will be taken farther. I probably will be overshadowed and taken care of. But we get, because that initial thing, just to realize there's a bigger picture, there's more trees, there's a whole forest, there's support and nurturance and all of that process. I had a woman that was one time in that had what's called a personality disorder, and was the only thing worse than having to deal with somebody is to have that yourself. It is really, really a harsh thing, and it has to do with a lot. There's been traumas and other things that usually has been that's caused that. And this woman had it was hard to be around. And we took her, a couple of us took her aside and said, listen, and we gave her what was then called the DSM-3. Now it's the DSM-5, but this dates how long ago this was. And we told her, said, read, this is the diagnostic expression and the symptomology of this, read this. And she goes, well, okay. And she read it. Apparently, she came back a couple hours and she just went, is that how I am? And we go, yes. So let's work on this. Let's help get your life back here. We didn't do it harshly, but we did it. How do you, because there's a saying, I can't escape from prison until I first realize I'm in the prison. I have to break down all of the blind spots in order for me to look at myself. And so she did that. She went through, she completed the program, did really well. I didn't hear anything of her for about 5 years or something like that. She'd moved out of the area. She came back to visit. She'd moved to a different state, gone back to school, and become a certified counselor and had a full practice. It was really because we didn't give up on her. And our focus was not to judge, but to be absolutely loving and aware. The notion of this for us is when I look at my biases, I can let them go. If I don't look there, I don't know they're there, and they hold me back. Now, I want to talk about a couple things here that I think are apropos. One is that, the statement, judge not lest ye be judged. That is such a powerful, powerful tool. And it's like, and we have a tendency, well, I'll do that philosophically, but when push comes to shove, it's easy to get into the judgment. Now, for me, the most, how would we say, tricky position to be in. And I call it the velvet trap, is to judge the judger. Oh, that person is so judgmental. I love that one. I catch myself, I go, oh my God. But the notion is that when I judge somebody, I set them apart and I isolate them. Now, why is, I bring that up because there are beliefs in the world today that people that are mentally ill, they could get better if they only wanted to. Or they're doing this purposely, or, oh, well, they're just one of those, just like that. And it's like, no, that's not the case. Judging not allows me to be that much more compassionate, but also allows me to be absolutely clear and focused and ready, available, not only to look at my own stuff, but to look at somebody else's and to be a helper and not a judger. I think it's a huge part of this whole thing of changing perspective. I look at what I can do right rather than I look at, I'm not the judge and jury. Any thoughts on that?
Well, Jesus said it all, just not judge not lest ye be judged.
That's pretty powerful, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's tricky. Because discernment is different than judgment. But judgment is such a separating factor. And people that were able to be to change their perspective really could let that go. The other thing that I love is, and if I have these, we can hand these out too. There's two pieces. I love this. Yeah, there's one. Yeah, I didn't want to make the type small, so the golden rule. And actually, has anybody ever done any research on the golden rule? It's pretty cool, isn't it? I once saw. I went to a homeopath up in Portland one time, and a Hindu man, and he had on his wall, there were actually 22. I've only found 14 here. But the notion of this, it's called, other cultures call it the ethic of reciprocity. I love that. But the notion is that it really, this is a tenet of humanity, of being a human. How do we live this? We do unto others as we'd have them do unto us. It's like, holy mackerel. I love it. Taoism, regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. Buddhism, treat no others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. I mean, it's fun to look at these things because they're all so similar. I love the Roman pagan. The law imprinted on the hearts of men is to love the members of society as themselves. It's like this is, and it's on. I would love to get the full 22 back because I couldn't, when I did my research, I could only come up with this many. But it's so fun because this is something that goes back 5,000 or more years. It goes into every culture. How do we treat each other? Because if I treat each other, it means that I'm allowed, if I treat you this way, it creates a harmony that allows both of us to come together and work more clearly and focused. So the golden rule and judge not lest ye be judged. Very powerful things. And it doesn't, I'm not talking from this, I'm talking about it more from a position of function rather than a position of religiosity here. This is a functional part of a society when we can do this because we become so much more available to be present in our desire to help others. So, the idea of perspective, looking at myself, looking at my biases, my outcome biases, looking at the fact that in any situation, I was giving a lecture one time about, I forgot what the thing was, about how to, spirituality and recovery or something like that. And all of a sudden I had these, you ever have little thought bubbles? Do you know what that is? I call them, where it's just like, there's just a little, it's almost like a thought up here. And I had this image of different things that had happened to me over the years, where I'd been in accidents or had other things happen, and everything turned out okay. And I'm going, why would I worry about today if I've been so taken care of my whole life? Allowing to shift that. Shift the perspective. There's more to this than not. Now, the next thing that we found, that people have this, that had resiliency, had a connection spiritually. And they made a point in this study that this was not a religious connection, that this was a functional spirit connection. Now, what do I mean by that? It means that that it was with me. And this is also very individual. It could be that I'm really deeply connected and I come and I pray in a church and I read the Bible and I do those things, or I read the Quran, or I read the whatever the holy books are, or I do different, all of that. But this is totally individual. But it means that I take it at a level that is beyond just thought, that it's inside, it's part of me. People that had resiliency knew that there was some energy or power that had their back at any given time. Pretty cool. And it's really and it's an individual thing.
Not to wade too far into the faith perspective, but there's a passage that I memorized a long time ago, and it's from Jeremiah, and God says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." And on those moments when it seems like all hell is breaking loose, I go right there.
Yes.
It pulls me, it gives me a different perspective.
Exactly. I had a gal in treatment years ago again, who was sharing, it was her last day of experience there, and this is, 30 some years ago now. And she said, how grateful, the biggest thing that she got on this whole process, that she was reconnected to her church and reconnected to spirit and reconnected to Jesus and the whole teaching spiritually with Christianity, and that she felt she goes, I'm just so grateful because I had gotten away from that because of the problem. And then she went on to talk, and she goes, and I'm really nervous about leaving today. And I'm really, because I don't want to go back, and I'm really just really nervous. And being somewhat of a smart ass, and also because I knew her sincerity, I looked over at her and I said, God, that is really, really too bad that you're so nervous, and this is the week that Jesus took off vacation time. And she looked at me, and she goes, what? And she, like this, and it was going to say something, and then she got it. And she looked at me, and she just nodded. She said, thank you. And you could see this sense of just, and she had it. It was a functioning energy that she was willing to have with her, not just some theory. Now, the reason that this is an individual thing, and I want to emphasize that, is because different people will have different stuff. I loved Stephen Hawking, for instance, was one of my heroes. Everybody know who he was? He was one of my heroes. I go, God, he never gave up. And he only spoke about the highest and best in what was going on. I mean, it was like, man, pretty cool. I had, I tell a story that happened with me that was pretty interesting. I took a chemistry class back when I was, like, I don't know, 28, 29 years old. I was going to change my major and become a chiropractor, and I had to do all this chemistry stuff in order to get in there, and then something happened when I couldn't go forward. But I had never taken chemistry. And so I'm sitting in this night class, and this guy's talking, and about the second time, or it was 3 hours of lecture, and then 3 hours later on in the week of lab, and I'm sitting there, and he started talking about mole weights in chemistry. Has anybody has taken chemistry? It's kind of, do you remember what a mole weight is? I forgot what they go, some number. I was going to write that down. It was I can't remember now, but the number was, But the number is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd power is a mole weight of whatever that substance is. And a mole weight of pure carbon then and the number represents the number of atoms of pure carbon in a mole weight. And so that would be 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. Now, if you understand exponentiation and so forth, it's like this number times itself and then times itself and times itself 23 times. The professor looked at us and he said, now, a mole weight of carbon is roughly half an ounce, or about 14 grams. And there are enough atoms in a half an ounce of pure carbon that you could cover the face of the earth 50 feet deep with half-inch marbles. And each one of those atoms is the equivalent spatially of being like a garden pea in the center of some, like a big room like this, or maybe even like the Houston Astrodome or something, and that there are 6 grains of sand going elliptically in orbit around that, and that's one of those atoms. And I had this experience. I'm looking around and to everybody else, and I remember doing the desk and looking, I go, it's all energy. It's all energy. And I had an awakening of thought, and I'd been raised as, in a traditional Lutheran church, and I'd had all kinds of experiences, and I had this, but it brought me to a point, it's all energy. Very interesting. I had a spiritual uplifting awakening process in a chemistry class. Go figure. Because it's an individual thing. A spirit connection is an individual thing. We define it ourselves. I remember right here down at the, the Safeway store, or the Albertsons. And I was talking with some friends waiting in line, and this is a long time ago now, and we're talking somehow the concept of God, or the discussion of God came up, and somebody said, we're talking about, well, God, God is like this. And there was this older gentleman standing right behind us. And I'll never forget him. He was a little bit, probably 2 or 3 inches taller than me, ramrod straight, like ironed khakis, highly tanned, just crystal blue eyes. And he looked down and he says, hey boys, he said, and this is like, say, he was probably my age, and I was, 35 or whatever it was. And he said, hey boys, talking about God, eh? I love to talk about God. And we went, you could hear my audible eye roll, like, oh, okay, here we go. And then he said, I love talking about God, G-O-D, the great outdoors. And I saw in him, at that moment, that level of spirit that he had when he was standing on a mountain or he was standing by a river, the acceptance of all of that, the flow of all of that, how real it was for him. He also gave me another gift, because he gave me the opportunity to look at my judgments. And I think about that often. I wish I could thank him. In the 12-step programs, a lot of people will come into AA and NA and those other 12-step programs, and they have a difficulty for various reasons. They haven't had a belief that they could follow in a God, and God is kind of like a bad word, in a way for some folks. And yet the tenets of the 12 steps are, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us. and made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. And so it becomes this kind of, sometimes it's hard. And so people have made other acronyms for God. The most fun one is the GOD, a group of drunks. That when I'm with a group of like-minded people, it makes a big difference. Or good orderly direction. So it's kind of fun. What I want to emphasize were people that were resilient had a belief that was greater than themselves. That was greater than themselves, that something else was there. Whether it was the cosmos spinning and moving on that, or whether it was somebody that came in physical form and in terms of Christianity, in terms of died on the cross, or whether it was other beliefs about, as Sikhism or, Buddhism or Native American teachings. That there was a power greater than themselves, and that they used this. It wasn't a theoretical issue. It was a practical way of incorporating that into their life. And it allowed them to be strong. It allowed them to stand firm and to not be held hostage by people, places, things, or situations. Pretty powerful stuff. The final piece that I want to talk about was something that I've added to this myself. When Bea introduced me, she said, I've been doing this a long time. I've done a lot of journeys, a lot of study, and I've been of service for quite a while. And the fifth component of this process for me is connection. That we're meant to be connected. Remember the old Simon and Garfunkel song, I'm a rock and I'm an island, and an island never cries and a rock feels no pain because I'm just so separate and all that. That's not who we are. We're connected people. We need connection. Where two or more are gathered, that is a prime example of this process. And when we see that in people, it really works. It works. Think about it. We have a church and we get together and we talk and we listen and we do that. We have AA and NA meetings, and all now there's the 12-step has expanded. I think there's probably over 150 different fellowships of people that use that process to help come together. One of the beliefs about connection is that we have. And I was taught this about relationships, intimate relationships, and primary relationships, as well as just general relationships. There's two things that are critically important. One is that it's okay for me to feel whatever I'm feeling, and the second one is that I can ask for my needs to be met. Doesn't mean that I'll get them met, but that it's safe enough for me to feel what I'm feeling, and that I can ask to get my needs met. So whatever group I'm with. How powerful is that? How many people saw the movie The March of the Penguins, narrated by Morgan Freeman? It's an extraordinary movie. I think, in fact, I have a sign on my refrigerator. It says, when I die, I want Morgan Freeman to narrate my life story. What a gift I think he has been. But that story, for people that have seen it and people who haven't seen it, there's a part where the penguins in Antarctica. Antarctica can be in its winter time can be a pretty drastically cold place, and all of these penguins, they get together, and it might be 50 below, 60 below zero, and the wind's blowing like this, and they form a mass, and there's penguins on the outside. And there's a natural shift that the penguins on the outside move in and the penguins on the inside move out, that it's a consistent onward pattern of loving and connecting and being with each other ongoingly. That's what connection is, that I have a group around me that will stand with me, a cadre. That's kind of an archaic term, but I love that term. It's a group of people that understand me and that are with me and that are here. I believe that's a critical way of dealing with crisis. Think about what happened with this fire here last September. And the amount of volunteering that happened to help people. They had to turn away people. I knew people that were saying, God, I went down there to help, and they said they had too many people already. Because we wanted to help. That's a sign of who we are and what we are. It's also a sign maybe of our community and this process. But how wonderful that is. When we understand that I'm not alone, it helps me be resilient. When I understand that I can give, and in that process, I'm being given. We hold on to the resiliency. We're going to have, hopefully, there'll be a presentation by a group called Compass House. And has anybody heard of them before? Compass House, it's just a wonderful place. But what it is, it is like a clubhouse for people with mental illness. And it's like they can go together and they can be helped and guided, and that they can be around other people that have the same patterns and the same things. And so they're not alone. I think about, like the idea of that people can understand who I am. I know a person who has since a very deep piece of, he has a thought disorder. And we were talking, and he was telling me, he said, he isn't always really cognizant, but this time, he said, it's just so exhausting because he hears voices. And sometimes the voices are kind, sometimes they're not, but they're always there. And he said, it's just so tiring, it's just so tiring. And I thought, I nod my head and I try to be a connection. Well, connected with that. About a week later, I had gone to the ear, nose, and throat guy for some other issue that I had to be taken care of. And I had found that I had developed tinnitus or tinnitus. Does anybody know what that is? You might, And and I said, is there something you can do for that? And the doctor just kind of laughed, and he said, if I could cure tinnitus, he said, I would have a line from people waiting to see me from here to Grants Pass. He said, yeah, not the front door. He said, there's nothing, you learn to live with that. And I went, oh, okay. And the next time I was with this young man that has the thought disorder, I had an understanding of what it must be like. I had to say, I have a little vibratory piece going on, like that comes and goes. He has voices, and he has to deal with that during all of his awakening times. What a strong person he is versus the belief that he was somehow weakened by this. He must be, holy mackerel, strong to put up with that. That's what connection does, is that it allows us to be of help and to see and allow us to also be helped. I help, it's a give and take. This whole piece of resiliency is how do I live my life not only stronger, but more lovingly and more purposefully. It really is. You can't ignore the separation of those qualities. And so the notion of putting in my life, the ability to quiet the mind, the ability to laugh more and have humor and see the cosmic giggle, the ability to have perspective and to look more clearly at the big picture rather than just the isolated issues that are causing me disturbance and frustration. The notion of really working my spirit connection. Functionally, it's there. And then to have connection. What happens is that I'm much, much stronger and much more able to get through the process. I want to, this will date me, maybe it will date some of you as well. But I wanted to, in closing, I wanted to read something that it was kind of cool. There was a song called "You'll Never Walk Alone." It was made famous by the Letterman, and I don't know, right around in the late '60s, I would think. But it was written by Oscar. Who is it? Oscar Hammerstein and what's the other one? Rogers and Hammerstein. It was written by them, and I didn't know that. But you'll never walk alone. And the word, I don't know if some of you might remember the song, but when you walk through a storm, keep your chin up high and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of a storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain. Though your dreams be tossed and blown, walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. To me, that defines resiliency. Thanks for listening.
Any questions for Siri? Comments?
You were going to say something about your name, and we never did hear that. So tell us about the name Siri.
Okay. Siri is a shortened name. I practiced the Sikh religion for about 8 years. I still am very connected, but I don't. I haven't worn a turban for many years, and but I had my hair grow and so forth. But so my full Sikh name was Siri Kartar Singh, and so Siri was when I took off the turban and then finally cut my hair and did that. People knew me as Siri and then as Siri David, so it became like that. So it's and I like to say that people that have iPhones, in fact, in this room, it's been really funny. I'd come into some meetings in this early morning, and I had a gentleman that would say, "Oh, good morning, Siri," and his phone, like 3 days when we did 3 times in a row, his phone, "And good morning to you." Any other thoughts or questions? Yes?
I was just reminded when you're talking about laughter, Anne Lamott's little phrase that laughter is carbonated holiness.
Oh my God, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thanks, Siri. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Being the first person. We're going to be setting out announcements for the subsequent ones. We'll have another 7 or 8 presentations. So you'll see those posted. So, like I said, I'll be over different topics over the next 3 months. And so you'll see those posted on the website, the church website. So you can pass it around if we'd like to have people from the community attend. This is, like I said, the grant is to open information to the community, not just to our church.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If you want to fill out evaluations and send